stage?
No. Everybody's hearing, okay? Great. And I will invite the panelists to join me on stage. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all hearing me. Those at the back of the room, they're hearing? No? You're here, yes. But we are going to get started today. Good afternoon to all. Thank you so much for spending some of your Sunday and weekend with us here. My name is Karen McDonald Gayle, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And I'm here with a most esteemed panel of specialists on conservation trust funds, but also on islands and small island developing states, which is what we are here to talk about today. So very happy to have you. I hope you're all hearing well with the headphones. If not, please let us know and somebody will help you to figure it out. The idea for the discussion and the idea of having this side event today came from ongoing work that the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund does. We ourselves are a regional environmental fund. We have under our wings an endowment fund that supports national level conservation trust funds. So we are at the regional level, and then they're in across the islands, 11 so far, soon to be 12. We're chairing for Cuba, national conservation trust funds across the Caribbean that we give funding to on a regular basis to do work on conservation. But we're not the only ones, and I have worked many times before with the two ladies on my right, and well, Yaba is my former boss, so he knows trust funds well. He's from Puerto Rico, so he counts for the Caribbean. But we have always talked and heard about Seychelles and Micronesia and the work that their trust funds are also doing. So then there's Kate, who tells us all of us need to talk together and get things done because we're all islands and we all need to figure out how this works. And the more we thought about it, there is value and there is sensitivity and nuances in small island developing states, which we knew already, but also the role of conservation trust funds in small island developing states. And that's how we're all here today, to talk more about that, to figure out what that means for us, to make sure we're sharing and thinking about what we do as next steps for that approach. So with that, I am going to first introduce Kate to give you a little more context, and then I will introduce the panel and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. And welcome, everyone. So I'm going to kind of connect what we're doing today. We had another side event a couple of days ago where we launched a conservation trust fund. Is that better? Okay. So a couple of days ago we had another side event at the Jeff Pavilion on conservation trust funds in SIDS and the new work towards a community of practice. And these are really the initial trust funds that are going to be part of that community of practice and advocacy. And a part of it comes from really recognizing that everyone trying to advocate or work on things individually is not as effective as if they work together. And because I speak to all of them, we realized that there was a lot of commonality in what they were doing. And we worked with Karen to kind of, as one of the things coming out of the recent international meeting on the sustainable development of small island states in Antigua and Barbuda, to have this as one of the things that's coming out of that thing focused specifically on the special circumstances of small island developing states with regard to conservation trust funds. And that's things like scale, its size, it's all of the issues that we heard through that meeting, and that has come out in the statement there. I think the capacity at island level to mobilise conservation resources, as we know, is really constrained. Also on developing projects, expending resources and all of those types of issues. But we also know, and the reality is that SIDS are stewarding geographically enormous parts of the world. And so we've got to kind of get this right and figure out how do we both help the conservation trust funds that exist right now to be able to do their work better, and what strategically can they do in each of the islands and across the islands to scale outwards. And I think that's really where we're going with this community of practice. We want people to be able to learn from each other, to look at, and you know, we've seen recent things like Seychelles, SECAT recently went to Micronesia to learn from them. I see lots more of that kind of learning and more opportunities for advocacy on the unique role that conservation trust funds can play in helping resources get to the communities and the spaces that they're needed in small island developing states. So I'm really excited about this panel, and I'm going to pass back to Karen.
Thank you. And so, let me introduce the panel, and then we will have some words for them. The panel to my right, and starting with Marie May Jeremy is the Chief Executive Officer of SECAT. And I'll let her tell you more. The other thing they will do is give you geography lessons, because I think all of you probably need geography lessons on where each of our islands are and where we fit in the global discussion. Beside her is Yabanex Batista. He will do the Caribbean geography lesson, which he didn't know, which is why he looks like that. And he is from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. And to his right is May Adams, who is the Executive Director of Micronesia Challenge Trust, and she's been on the job less than a month. So we all know about baptism by fire. We do it well in the islands, so we will go with that. So if you could all, first a geography lesson, tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your organizations, and maybe what you want to see of the discussion today.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure for me to join this panel this afternoon. As introduced, my name is May Jeremy, and I'm the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. So the quick geography: Seychelles, small group of islands, east coast of Africa. As part of this community, I'm representing the region, so quite a big role, and very pleased about that. So SECAT started engaging with the team here a few months back, and I think it followed a little bit the exchange that we had in Micronesia. And again, we saw a lot of commonalities in the issues, but also in the solutions and in the opportunities that we want to focus on. So as part of the discussions today, I want us to be able to focus more on the solutions and the opportunities that can be born from this group of people. And I'm really, really hopeful that we will have something strong that will come out, especially in the face of limited resources, limited availability to fundraise as individual countries. So I think together we stand a stronger chance to successfully move towards implementation of the KMGBF. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Yaba?
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. Jaba Batista from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. First, about the Caribbean. I'm from Puerto Rico, as Karen mentioned, and we're actually, even though we're a U.S. territory, we are an associated SID as well, and we suffer from the same issues that sovereign SIDs suffer in the Caribbean and elsewhere in the world. And one of the things that I find very interesting when you look at the group of SIDs around the world, and this is very much part of the issues we have in the Caribbean, is that you have sovereign SIDs, but then you have territories that are SIDs, so therefore they have a metropolis somewhere. In the case of the Caribbean, we're talking about the US, France, the UK, the Netherlands, as those former colonial powers that still have territories in the Caribbean. And then in our case, the panorama gets more complicated because we speak Spanish, English, Dutch, French, Creole, and then bringing us together sometimes can be difficult because we're sometimes separated by political boundaries and separated sometimes by language barriers. But actually what unites us is the Caribbean Sea, and what unites us also has to be the power of institutions like the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund that are aiming to bring all these islands together to work on common challenges by finding common financial solutions for what we have to deal with in our islands. And I know this happens in Micronesia as well, part of this at least. What is the GFCR? The GFCR is a global coalition that was launched in 2020. We are a coalition that aims to support the conservation and resilience of coral reefs around the world, the people that depend on them and the economies that they underpin. We do this by unlocking private and public sector resources to build what we call reef-positive businesses and financial mechanisms. So we want to create a new breed of businesses that really put nature and the ocean at its center, so that then those businesses can create wealth for people and a resilient marine environment. I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll talk about how we are working with conservation trust funds as well later on.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think that's a great segue because I'm going to tell a little story. My name is Mae Bruton Adams. I am from Micronesia, and as Karen said, I am, I think, 3 weeks, 4 days, and less than 12 hours on the job. When I arrived, I think it was a day before yesterday, I had a gentleman come up to me and he asked me where I was from, and I was in full Micronesian garb. I wore the skirt, I wore the shells and the flower, and he asked me, where are you from? And I said, Micronesia, and he goes, what? And then he goes, I'm a geography teacher. I've never heard of your place. And I said, oh, well, and then I explained, we're just east of you, about 14 hours difference. The island I live on is 7 degrees north of the equator, and so on and so forth. And then he asked me, what currency do you use? And I decided to be cheeky because we use the US dollar and it's not very exciting. And I said, fish. And he went, what? And I said, fish. Our currency is fish. No, but what is your economy based on? Fish. How big is your island? I said, well, the island I live on is about 148 square miles. And then I had to do the math and, kilometers square. And he's just like, how many people in total? And I said, in total, like for the whole Micronesia archipelago? He goes, yes. I said, we're not even a million. There's like 500,000 of us on a good day. And his eyes got bigger and he said, but I wanted to ask you for some money. I want to take your currency into my classroom and show my kids. And I said, I can get you some fish. The point now, I'll stop. I did eventually give him Fiji money, but that's not from Micronesia, that's more south. But the point is, I think a lot of the Pacific Islands and actually the SIDS, there's a lot that rests on our shoulders, and people forget that we've already paid collateral. We've given you a down payment. And when we ask for support and you ask us to match, when I tell you that the Micronesia region has decided to put up their marine resources, 50% of that to be managed and conserved, how much more collateral do you need from me?
Thank you. Well said. Thank you, Marie-May. So let's talk a little bit more about the role that conservation trust funds can play in this discussion. In the context, as May has said, of limited financial resources, what innovative finance mechanisms have you guys seen successfully implemented in SIDS, and maybe what maybe the key factors in that we could think about for other SIDS? We can start with Marie-May.
I think from our side, as most of you would know, even our organization, we were born out of a financial mechanism. So we've done the debt swap, we've done the blue bonds, and now when we're looking at what's over the horizon with the amount of money that is required to implement a lot of the actions that has been developed as part of those past mechanisms, I think we're still in the process of understanding what's the landscape out there. It's very difficult. Whilst there is a lot of money out there, it is not always easy for us to be able to sit at those tables and be part of the design of any of the solutions that then are brought back for us to implement. And this is where we are in the Seychelles. And a lot of the time that we have spent over the past year and a half to try and fundraise, for instance, for our Marine Spatial Plan, which has been an integral part of our Debt for Nature swap, we have encountered a lot of difficulties, a lot of barriers, and a lot of dead ends. And so this is why when we come to this COP right now, I think there is a lot on the line for us. And when we're talking about innovative financial mechanisms, what does that actually mean for us in the islands? How much are we able to contribute to these things that are going to come back and hopefully bring financing for us? So is it going to be a better design blue bond? That's up to be found. Is it something else? That's also up for discussions. And in a lot of the engagements that we've been having over the past few days, this has been where the question lies. And I think that's something that we would probably have to group together and decide what's best for the SIDS as we move forward.
Yeah, and maybe if May could go in second as the other CTF, and I will add my 2 words as Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. One of the other ideas is there's always this need the innovation seems to be continuous, but it's not necessarily innovation on what we've already worked on. So I've literally heard people say, we did endowments already, why are we still doing endowments? Because donors, those looking for the flags to fly, keep wanting new flags. Those of us who've been working through regular processes that we know work have been challenged or have been asked over and over again to try again with a new idea. So the balance of what worked and making sure it works and continues to work is very important, and maintaining some of the good things that we've started, along with, of course, building on those new ideas. And it is something we continue to work on. But I'll hand over to May.
I think the endowments are important because you need to be able to tell private donors, go away. No, you don't drive the agenda, we do. And we're tired of the one-off projects. Don't come and give and tell us and dictate what we're supposed to conserve and what we're not. If you have a strong endowment that can support conservation on the ground, you then dictate the way the money comes to you. And that is the most important. So give to the endowments. You affect more people, you affect more of the region, and it gives the people with the resources you claim you're trying to help, it gives them back their power. I hate to use that colonial mindset. Like I do not like to beat people over the head with that, because if I were to be honest, I am a result of a white invasive species. I'm half white. I'm also a quarter Japanese. The point I'm trying to make here is empower the people who depend on those resources, and the only way to do that is to give to their endowments. Let them have the power, give them the opportunity to dictate how things happen on the ground.
All right. Yeah, but you sure you want to go? I will quickly add to that. One of the other discussions and aspects that goes with that idea of maintenance, of paying salaries and donors that don't want to pay for operating costs. I'll put in terms of our CTF hats, we definitely need the reconsideration that operating costs and being able to manage on the ground and continue the work we started that was so great is very important. And again, one of the things we have continuous discussions on. But Yaba, Global Fund for Coral Reefs, we know you're doing it differently. Please tell us more.
I think we're going to need 2 hours, Karen, after the statements so far. I want to start with the endowment point. Nobody questions Harvard University, MIT, or Yale for having big endowments. Nobody. Why should CTFs be questioned for wanting to increase and enlarge their endowments? And it is the basis. It is the basis. In my experience during the last, I don't know how many years working on conservation trust funds, as Karen was saying, endowments are key because it's what allows you to grow. It is what allows you to diversify your portfolio of financial solutions because it gives you security. The endowment gives you that financial security that you can keep doing your mission, keep going on your mission, but it should also give you security in terms of the institutional security to be able to hire staff and to keep your staff in payroll. Because if you are project dependent, then you're not a sustainable financial mechanism, which is what CTFs are supposed to be. So my message often, and now as a donor as well, is that us in the donor side, we cannot ask conservation trust funds to work on sustainable finance mechanisms if us ourselves don't allow them to be sustainable institutions. So that's my first point. And I'll get to how we are helping to do that. My other point is to you, Karen. I actually don't like the word innovation. I think it's the word that we should all scrap from our discourse, because what we need to focus on is on building from what's working. So I rather focus on the build up from what we already have, and that's what the GFCR is doing. We are working in 23 countries around the world to bring blended finance approaches, again, for building reef-positive businesses and creating new and expanded financial mechanisms. 3 of those programs are actually managed and coordinated and implemented by conservation trust funds. I'm really proud to say that SECA is our convening agent and main partner in the Seychelles. Then we have Fondo Acción here in Colombia, who is our main partner in the country, and then MARFund, which is a regional conservation trust fund like the CBF, which actually works in Mexico, Honduras, Belize, which is a SID, and Guatemala. But we don't stop there. It actually also happens that several of our convening agents are partnering with conservation trust funds because they understand that to develop the reef-positive businesses that we need on those financial mechanisms, they need to be part of the equation. So the Nature Conservancy actually has partnered with BPAF, the Bahamas Protected Area Fund, in our Bahamas-funded program, and with the Micronesia Conservation Trust in the Micronesia program that we're also funding through the Nature Conservancy as our main partner. But we are also working with other partners on building new conservation trust funds. We're actually doing this in Egypt, with UNDP as our main partner, and also in Sri Lanka. And while Sri Lanka is not a SID itself, the conditions that you see in Sri Lanka are actually quite similar. So over there, we are also working on supporting the development of conservation trust funds. And we have 2 other programs that are in the making that are hopefully going to be implemented and managed by conservation trust funds in Brazil and in Mozambique. So not all are SIDS, as of course, as you can see, but it is important that we trust conservation trust funds in the work that they are doing. And maybe if I can use as an example what I think is going to be one of the best solutions that we're going to be able to support in our portfolio is the Sustainable Livelihoods Fund that TNC and MCT are working on. This, and I know May can talk to this much better than I can, but what I love about that solution is that this is building on the, I don't know how many decades of work already of the MCT, but not only on the work of 2 decades of the MCT, but the work of the governments and the partners in the water and in the land in Micronesia through the Micronesia Challenge. And I think this is what we need to do. We have this commitment from the countries, from the partners, from local financial partners as well, and we just need to keep building them. But we need to give May, in her new job, the tools so that she can hire the people to do this work. Yes. And that's what we need to focus on.
Thank you very much. And just to add that it builds on a number of other points, and some of these I made on, the days are all lost, on Thursday in the discussion on that we first had on SIDS, the idea that, and conservation trust funds, that there are a number of major organizations that have seen the value in conservation trust funds. GFCR is working with them. The Project for Permanence team and Enduring Earth has a number of projects that they do through conservation trust funds specifically. And on Monday, and the reason why Céline is here is Jeff has also, in a big way, made the bid and the argument and seen the value in working with conservation trust funds. So they're doing it at the global scale, but how we reached to this discussion is that at the global scale, the conservation trust funds are very needed and very important to get the funds to the ground. For those who were in Antigua at the SIDS-4 conference, that was a big message, that there are all these wonderful announcements of new funding for climate change and new funding for GBF, but there's no money on the ground and getting to the ground. And the governments are doing their part, but there are others who can also play a part, and we definitely are advocating for the role that conservation trust funds can play as partners alongside and beside the government players in terms of what's possible for national goals. And so maybe I'll throw that back to the panel to ask a little bit more about the partnership with the government and achieving national goals and the role that you've played in that regard and getting funds from that very high level Green Climate Fund type, GBF type levels to the ground in the countries.
I guess I go first. I do want to ask a quick question. We'll play a quick exercise. Stand up if you think climate change is the most impactful thing that could actually happen to islands. Like, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to islands. Please stand up. Yeah. All right, so I noticed only 2 people sat down. Do you want to tell me what you think the biggest threat is to islands? If it's not climate change, what is it?
So I actually have a climate change adaptation consulting firm, so I do think it's the greatest global challenge. But I think for islands, the greatest challenge is isolation, is actually not working collaboratively, because then they are vulnerable to market forces, to global dynamics. So I think there is something that we can do against the biggest threat, which is isolation.
Okay, I also do agree it's a massive threat to small and developing states, but I think our biggest threat is the lack of capacity. We simply do not have the needed capacity within our countries to ensure that we're well prepared for helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So for us, at least for me, my personal opinion, it's lack of capacity.
So I just received a report. My son is a senior in university. He's an econ finance major, and he had to do a research paper. And one of the things he said was, hey, I just found a US CIA report that said Micronesia is one of the top 10 countries where the people are migrating at an astounding rate, 2%, almost 2% per year. So I will tell you now, it is capacity. It is the loss of human beings. And when that happens, the need to give also shrinks. And we need to find a way to bring capacity home. And I think that right there is the biggest issue. So yes, money absolutely is a factor. Our governments are sitting here asking us to do bigger and better, because when we come here, we can make this fantastic show. Hey guys, we're about to meet our 30 by 30. Hey guys, we just in 2020, our chief executive said 50% marine conservation and management, 30% terrestrial for the whole region. And we're going, okay, we got our marching orders. How are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? How are we going to pay for it? That right there. So while this is great for conservation, because you think your government is with you and they're joining forces with you, but in practicality, when you get home, they leave it to us and the NGO and the conservation community and our youth to try and figure it out. You know, I have a feeling I started in this before Lauren was even in high school. She's a few years older than my oldest daughter, and when I told her I was going to join MCT, she goes, "You're still doing Micronesia Challenge work? What the heck is going on? You guys," her exact words was, "You told us that you were doing this for the future generation. That future generation is here. We're right here. And now you're making us do it too." She was my business partner for like for a year. No, not Lauren, but my daughter, for over a year. And that's the thing. It's great when your government wants to step in. It's not so great when they don't want to actually help you implement or give you the funds to get it done. But I don't blame them, because they're just as strapped as well. They're trying to figure out that nexus between conservation and infrastructure development. How do we feed our people? How do we get to the medicine to the right places? How do we educate our kids? And then how do we bring our kids home? So partnership is great, but I think this is one fantastic thing about this, because you're not telling us to choose between protecting our resources and feeding our people. You're saying, no, the two things work hand in hand, and we're going to help you fund it to see how business and conservation actually come together. And I think this is so great. I'm super excited.
Thank you, May. I actually thought that you were going to ask, who thinks is climate change the biggest threat? And then everybody would stand up. And then I thought you were going to say, who thinks biodiversity loss is the biggest threat? And then everybody would stand up. And then you would ask, who thinks lack of capacity is the biggest threat? And then everybody would stand up again. And then who would say, who thinks it's lack of money the biggest threat or challenge? And then everybody would stand up. And that's what we see in SIDS. And that's why conservation trust funds are important, because we cannot divorce what's happening in the international arena with the 3 conventions meeting crazily at the same time. Basically, in the span of 6 weeks, the UNCCD climate change and biodiversity conventions are meeting in the span of 3 weeks this year. And we continue to have the same old conversation that started in Rio in 1992, separating those conversations. For us in the islands, that's not possible, and that's why I see a value and a difference with conservation trust funds in islands. In a place like Colombia, you can maybe have more refined mechanisms, more refined trust funds. It's a big country, and maybe you can say, yes, here we need a fund, a conservation trust funds that focus on just this. And in another big country, you could do the same. But when we talk about the Caribbean islands, about Seychelles, about Micronesia, we need conservation trust funds that can actually tackle the biodiversity, the climate agenda, the resource mobilization, the capacity, all at the same time, because we don't have the luxury to be creating multiple funds. We need to work with other partners in the country. We need to work with the development banks in the country. All of FSM, RMI, Palau, they have their development banks, right? Seychelles as well. So we need to find those partnerships within the financial ecosystem that we have in our islands, but and define better what is the role of the conservation trust funds. I'll tell you what I think, particularly in SIDS, is one of the key roles, particularly as conservation trust funds like CECAR and MCT start moving into the blended finance sphere. Again, we're building from what they've done already with the instruments that they already have, and they are conveners. They are bringing everybody to the table. They are trusted by the private sector. They are trusted by the communities. They are trusted by the governments. We just need, again, to give them the tools so that they can do that work. And in our case, blended finance, convening conservation trust funds can be one of the perfect vehicles for deploying the technical assistance that is required for developing these businesses, so that then the private sector can come in and scale up and replicate those businesses. Thanks.
Thanks, Yaba. Marie-May, if your words on ideas for national development and the role of trust funds, and then the floor will be open.
Okay, I think just in the same line of capacity, even engaging with government and having the right capacities within government for them to have those proper discussions with you in identifying or building on the commitments already made and the ones that are upcoming. Because what seems to happen is, there is a lot of pressure when you come to big meetings like this on the global scene for governments to make commitments, to commit to protection for biodiversity, for climate, for oceans and everything. So the country and sometimes the governments, they are of the perception that if you go for these commitments, then the support will follow. But that doesn't always happen. And so you always end up with a situation whereby you have a lot of commitments, but now when you come back in country, you do not necessarily have the capacity for you to deliver on a lot of those commitments. And so I think the now approach that we're discussing with government now is, how do you use the existing resources to meet all of those demands? If there's more money in climate finance, how do we support biodiversity objectives with that same pot? And how do we make sure that the people on the ground, and like May said, on the ground, it's not actually government that's implementing, that's managing protected areas. It's NGOs, it's individuals, it's people who really have the heart, for environment. These are the people on the ground. So how do you make sure that they are getting the money that they need in light of those international commitments that the country pronounces on? And so that's a little bit that difficulty. And for us, this is the role that we think the CTFs can play in leveraging funding for impact and action.
Thank you. Is this one working now? Okay, so thank you all. You see we have a great panel, so I'm now going to open the floor. Safia is already hands up. I want to acknowledge Frank, who's from a CTF, an island CTF. We're acknowledging all island CTFs. So Frank is with the Coral Trial Initiative. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Karen, and thanks so much to all the panelists. I thought that was really, really wonderful interventions and the right set of people to have on the stage, so thank you so much. My question is around, how do we go about setting up an enabling environment? So based on all the challenges that you've mentioned, what are some of the key lessons that we can learn from the work that you have done in setting up enabling environments, not just at the national level, but at the regional level, to support not just getting in more money, but I know, Java, you don't like the word innovative, but maybe sustainable financing. So one of the things that we're seeing at the global level is a lot of the funds that are being set up, they're not being capitalized. And the question that I often ask is, as islands, what can we do to ensure that we get the right amount of money? And that money, if it's public financing, how can it leverage additional financing, including from the private sector, to help close the financing gap that we usually experience? And the other point that I'd like to make is, when we sit down in negotiations, especially in setting up of new conventions, one of the things that we ask for as small island developing states is a finance mechanism that delivers financing to us. So as governments, we are the first advocates for financing on the negotiation floor. And so when that financing target or that financing fund is being capitalized, it's because of the work of governments. And so it gets to the CTF starting from that starting point. And I guess the other sort of gap we've noticed is when the CTFs are working on implementing activities, we wonder how useful it is, some of the national policies, some of these, the MBSAPs, the NDCs, the NAPs, how useful it is for the CTFs in supporting project implementation, but also communicating to the donor the priority needs of countries. So I know it's a lot, but...
And I would add, one of the interesting points is, for each one and each negotiation, I'll let the others speak, the idea that a new fund is started each time. Let's do a new CTF, something else for the countries to think about generally, but in particular in islands, I'll put my Jamaica hat on. Jamaica has three conservation trust funds. You know, it's still the same island. It's still trying to figure out. So now it's left again back to us to figure out how we're working with the various partners. So the idea of how we use those funds and work with the existing trust funds is something else. Did anybody want to answer Sophia's thoughts, questions?
So Micronesia has a unique relationship with the United States, with the exception of Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. But the three island nations, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia, have a trust mechanism with the United States under the Compact of Free Association. The way that trust was designed, and I'm not giving you all of the agenda items there, but there's infrastructure, there's economic development, and there's actually an environment component. So it's not, the idea of trust is not new. What was new to the government was this idea of trust funds specifically for conservation. That they couldn't wrap their heads around. That was really difficult. So I think that's one, is getting them to understand that, wait, we're not creating something separate from what you, the nation, has as a trust. We're actually trying to, as you said, bridge that gap or fill the gap. How do we fill that gap? Because your priorities are somewhere else, right? So that's one. The second question is, how do you create those mechanisms, right? Or how do those mechanisms get created? So for Micronesia, the story is a little bit different. MCT was originally designed just for the group of islands that I am from, to help support action on the ground and help the NGOs get monies that they didn't qualify for because they either weren't big enough or hadn't been around long enough. Then when the chief executives made that grand announcement in Curitiba, the idea was, oh my goodness, how are we going to shuffle money around? How are we going to get money to where it needs to go? How are we going to get the Jeff funds? Because Jeff decided in that one great moment, they were going to actually put seed money towards an endowment. And they needed a mechanism to be able to disperse that and to collect the monies for the other countries. So fortune fell in our laps. And sometimes opportunity just drops and you got to go for it, right? But the next phase is, how do you get it to where it needs to go? Because we're regional. We can't sit there and place money in each of the communities. So the PAN funds were created. Each island was supposed to have a dispersal mechanism, but again, birthed out of the CBD, the Program of Work on Protected Areas, the Program of Work on Island Biodiversity. That's missing now. The island agenda, the island program of work, that's missing right now. And we need that back on the UN CBD agenda now. We need it back now. Those are some of the bridges. We can talk about it some other time.
All right. You have an answer there, and then we will start a wrap up.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things we've been fighting for since the negotiations of the KMGBF, to say we need a stronger voice for oceans, but we also need back our island, our POIB, the Program of Work on Island Biodiversity, because that's the entry point for us CTFs when we find that, and it would penetrate down to the MBSAP, so then it becomes at the national level, and so then we can draw up programs and initiatives that, you know, that uses those international ways for us to access funds, and that's something we're going to keep asking for, and we're not going to stop until we get it.
Maybe just a couple of comments on the NBSAP's point. That's actually one of the things that in the GFCR we've learned in this first 4 years of our work. We noticed that our programs were not really focusing enough on the policy and the enabling environment. So we are honing in more on that. We're making stronger connections through our partners, but also within the larger UN system, like programs like BioFin, on how is it that a program like BioFin can link up with the kinds of work that the GFCR is doing. But I think your question, Sophia, and your point is also relevant from another perspective. My experience when I was with Karen at the CBF and working throughout the Caribbean islands reminds me of the comment I made before. We have these silos at the international convention level, but when we go back to our islands, we also have to deal with our own silos. there, like agriculture, fisheries, environment in our islands are quite fragmented. And I think this is, again, part of the value of the CTFs in SIDS. Again, a challenge has been governments being able to trust that these entities can be independent but also be partners that deliver for the government objectives. And the value of that is not that governments are not doing their work. Actually, governments are doing their work. But governments do change, and everybody here knows that. And conservation trust funds can be that constant that remains. One administration comes and another goes. A CTF can provide continuity from one administration to the other. So creating that balance, getting to that agreement is not easy, and it's a continuous work. I think Micronesia has been partly at least successful in being able to keep momentum in the Micronesia Challenge and with MCT across multiple administrations, not only nationally, but at the regional level. I think in other parts of the world, it's been difficult. I think in Seychelles, there is progress in this area as well. SEICAT being recognized by multiple administrations as a key partner for delivering the commitments of the country. So we need to continue to hone in on that, and that is part of us, donors, again, part of our responsibility to show governments that we trust MCT and that we trust SEICAT.
Thank you. And you know, Yaba used to have a phrase when he worked with us that we were a plane, building the plane while we're flying. And that's literally what we're doing, what we've been doing the whole time we've been in existence. We're strapped on time. Kate has the last word, but ahead of Kate, I'm going to introduce Céline, who is a senior biodiversity specialist with the Global Environment Facility. As I mentioned, Jeff has been a key partner with Conservation Trust Funds, and in particular on Monday we will launch a joint paper with Jeff on the value of conservation trust funds globally. So I'm happy to have her give her thoughts on all that she's just heard. Thanks, Céline.
Thank you, Karen. So let me introduce me quickly. So my name is Céline Coisy. I'm at the Jeff since 1 year now, so quite new. I work in particular on projects and partnerships concerning SIDS, and more specifically in the Caribbean SIDS. And I'm very happy to be in this panel today with all these persons engaged in the conservation, because indeed I worked 20 years in the Caribbean on conservation projects, and I know how hard it is to mobilize long-term financing resources and to foster the capacity building on the islands. I know how hard it is to improve the knowledge and to find the data, to share the data with the other islands. I know how hard it is to find new funds to continue a project, to find a specialist, and how to keep it in the island. And most of the time we realize that the data, the scientific data, is on foreign university. So I'm quite aware of the different issues you talked this afternoon, and I've noticed a different point that I would like to highlight, because as everybody said, you all have community of practice and common issues, and I've been really interested of the notion of the fact that the CTF will bring the islands together, because we have some SIDS and we have other territories sometimes which have not SIDS, and it's quite important to have the CTF that can provide the financial solution which is constant while the political situation can change. And the Conservation Trust Fund can give this financial continuity. I also I've been really interested about the fact that it's important, because I also faced this situation. The importance to keep people, the youth people in the countries, and to strengthen the capacity, because it's one of the most important problems that I've had also in Martinique, a French island. And it's quite important to have young people that can stay, can find their job in the island and face all this environmental problem. So I will probably repeat what has already been said many times, but all these islands are quite vulnerable. They have to face many issues, but their contribution to the global environment is huge, and each impact on their ecosystems means significant impacts at the global level. And I would like to say something about the Caribbean. What we say in Martinique, I don't know on the other island, but is that the islands are not isolated, and the water is not what separates the island, but what links an island to another. And the sea is what is important. In this context, I think this country must consider the development of their territory for a landscape approach as an important level which integrates the conservation of the exceptional natural heritage and the development of the economy and livelihoods of local people based most of the time of those same landscapes, from mountains to the sea, from the high forest to the mangrove, from an island to another in really tight space. And this vision is, I think, not only Caribbean, and this in this context, this landscape approach, is involve the land and the sea and the relationships between both, and well as between the islands. And that's what you said in your own intervention. The way that the cooperation can be lead between the different islands, and it's an evidence for me, and it's necessary and important to find collective solutions. I mean, I've been interested also the fact that you don't like the word innovation, because you think that we need to work on things that's already worked on the ground, and we don't really need necessary innovations. So
Thank you.
we have to leave.
Unfortunately, yes, we're crunched on time.
Okay. So just to finish about the GEF Trust Fund, the GEF will continue its partnership with the CTF and would still have the money available for the different projects, and in particular on the GBFF now. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, we've got to actually wrap up our session. If you want to learn more about the Micronesia Challenge and moving from commitment to action, there is a side event tomorrow, somewhere, I can't remember where. And grab lunch, and we have to head out because the next event is starting here at 2. Thank you very much to the speakers, and thank you very much.